Like
Good afternoon. How's everybody doing? Great to be learning with you on a Friday. Erev Shabbos. Let's light up the darkness. Everything worked correctly today. And sometimes that shocks me. Although I couldn't get the speaker going for the music before the show started. So not everything worked perfectly. So thank God not everything worked perfectly. Who's in the house? Yehudit in South Carolina. Did the storm reach you, Yehudit? It's crazy what's going on there. I hope everybody's okay. Sharon in New Jersey. Shandora in the Bronx. Gordo in Scotland. Joe in the Inland Empire. Lorraine in Texas. Tom in PA. Sharon, what are we doing tomorrow evening? That's a good question. So we start Slichas tomorrow night. Sharon is talking about the difference between Ashkenazim and Sephardim, right? So Sephardic Jews have been doing Slichas all through the month of Elul. Ashkenazim, Northern European Jews, start doing that tomorrow night. Motzi Shabbos, after Shabbos, before Rosh Hashanah. So we are going to be doing it in LA at 1 a.m. It's kind of unbelievable. Excuse me. But yeah, we're going to be doing that at 1 a.m. tomorrow night. So I had thought to just do the show as usual. Maybe even for you, Sharon, hopefully we'll get on the air early enough that, you'll be able to catch the show and then go to Slichas. So it'll be business as usual tomorrow night. Shabbos is ending earlier and earlier. Maybe I can get on by 8 or close to 8 tomorrow here in LA. And then, so it should be normal schedule, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday. Then Wednesday we have to think about because Rosh Hashanah begins Wednesday night. So definitely won't be regular schedule. Maybe we'll do a noon show on Wednesday, or maybe none at all. So by Tuesday, we'll have the holiday schedule posted. But this is something I need to talk through with my smarter half. As you all know, that's Nina. So let me figure that out. But yeah, I think we'll just do the show as normal tomorrow, Motzi Shabbos. And hopefully that won't interfere with your slickest and we can catch you live, Sharon. Otherwise, you'll have to catch it a little later or Sunday morning. Who else is here? Melissa in Great Neck and Belle in Texas. Cindy. I don't understand what that message is about. Yehudit says the lights were flickering. What is this? Nina, I'll let you take care of this spam issues. I'm not sure what the heck is going on there. Okay, over on the YouTube side, Franco in Trieste, Italy. Ella's in the house, and Ilanit in Silver Spring. Okay, let's get to it. Relatively short daf. And we're going to, God willing, open and complete Mishnah number 3 here in chapter 6 of Tractate Bava Basra, the 23rd volume of the Talmud. We're picking this up right at the bottom of page 97b. If one sells wine to another and then it sours, the seller does not bear financial responsibility for its loss. But if it is known of this seller that his wine always sours, then this sale is a mistaken transaction, i.e., a transaction based on false assumptions, as the buyer intended to purchase wine, which means wine that would maintain its quality, and therefore the seller must reimburse the buyer. And if the seller said to the buyer, "It is wine that is spiced, which is preserved and of lasting quality, that I am selling to you," then he bears financial responsibility to provide him with wine that will keep until the festival of Shavuos. And if the seller said, "I am selling you old wine," he is responsible to provide wine from the previous year. And if he said, "I am selling you aged wine," he is responsible to provide wine that is from 3 years earlier. Fascinating, right? This is sort of consumer protection laws from our sages from a couple thousand years ago. That's the Mishnah. We're on page 98a. Here comes the Gemara. Rabbi Yosef, the son of Rabbi Hanina, says, when they taught that the seller does not bear responsibility if the wine sours, that was only if it soured while in the jugs of the buyer. But if it soured in the jugs of the seller, then the buyer could say to him, "This is your wine, and this is your jug. Take it and reimburse me." Since it soured while still in the original jugs, it was clearly flawed from the outset. The Gemara says, or the Gemara asks, but even if the wine soured while in the jugs of the seller, right, the one selling the wine, we had a little confusion a couple days ago with the word seller. Here we're saying S-E-L-L-E-R, the seller, as opposed to the buyer. But when we're talking about wine, sometimes we're talking about a wine seller, C-E-L-L-A-R. But today we're talking about one who sells wine, a wine seller. Okay. So the Gemara asks, but even if the wine soured while in the jugs of the seller, what of it? Let the seller say to the buyer, "You should not have left it for so long after purchasing it. I should not be responsible just because you chose to do so." And the Gemara answers, no. This ruling is necessary in a case where the buyer had said to him that he was purchasing the wine for cooking, in which case it is understood that he needs it to maintain its quality over a longer period of time, as only a small amount is used each time. So interesting, right? We saw this last week, that cooking wine is understood to be of higher quality than drinking wine. Certainly the opposite of what we're used to today. But here you see why. Because wine that's going to be for cooking, they're only going to use a little bit at a time, and it needs to last longer. Also, you see why the stronger wine that was common in ancient times made more sense, right? The wine was like 4 times as strong as it is now, almost like brandy, let's say. But brandy, you can keep brandy in your cabinet and it won't go bad for a really long time, right? Once you dilute it, there's not as much alcohol in the beverage preserving it. And that's why, wine can go bad after it's been opened, whereas brandy doesn't. So now it makes more sense that the wine was much stronger. But for drinking it, making kiddush, etc., they would dilute it. So the final mixture was 3 parts water, 1 part wine. So that's the picture's coming into focus, as it were. Okay. In explanation, Rava said, The Mishnah was difficult for him, as it teaches in the following clause, but if it is known of this seller that his wine always sours, then this sale is a mistaken transaction. So with regard to this clause, one could ask, why? Let the seller say to him, you should not have left it for so long after purchasing it. Rather, isn't it correct to conclude from that clause that the Mishnah is referring to a case where the buyer had said to him, he wants the wine for cooking. And the Gemara concludes, yes, one can conclude from it that this is so. If he said he needs it for cooking, then the seller is guaranteeing that if it's of a quality necessary for cooking wine that will last longer, that if the buyer didn't say what he needed it for, the seller doesn't have to provide wine of that quality. And Rabbi Yosef, the son of Rabbi Hanina, disagrees with the opinion of Rav Chia bar Yosef. As Rav Chia bar Yosef says, with regard to wine, it is the owner's poor fortune that causes the wine to go sour, as it is stated. And moreover, wine is a treacherous dealer. The haughty man abides not. Habakkuk 2:5, which is interpreted to mean that the wine of a haughty man will betray him, as it will sour as a punishment for his arrogance. Accordingly, since the wine soured after the buyer purchased it, he cannot place the blame on the seller. Now, the Gemara offers additional homiletic interpretations of the verse that was just cited. Rav Mari said, one who is haughty is not accepted even by members of his own household. As it is stated, the haughty man abides not. What does the phrase abides not mean? It means that even in his abode, and here we're doing a little bit of a word play. Abides is yinveh, and abode is naveh, and those are very similar. And so it means, what does the phrase abides not mean? It means that even in his abode, he is not accepted. Rav Yehuda says that Rav says, with regard to anyone who glorifies himself by wearing a garment of the style worn by a Torah scholar, but in reality he is not a Torah scholar, he will not be brought within the boundary of the Holy One, blessed be he, in the world to come. And this is alluded to by the fact that it is written in the verse here, abides not, and the meaning of the word yinveh, abides, may be derived from that which is written in a verse there, to your holy habitation, neveh, in Exodus 15:13. Back to the law of sales. Rava says in the case of one who sells a barrel of wine to a shopkeeper, with the understanding that the wine will be for serving to the shopkeeper's customers, and that he will be liable to pay the seller only once the barrel is finished, sort of like a consignment, and the wine spoiled when half or a third of the wine still remained. So the law is that the seller must accept back the remaining wine from the shopkeeper, as the shopkeeper is liable to pay only for the wine that he sells to his customers. And we stated this law only in a case where the shopkeeper had not switched the tap of the barrel. But if he had switched the tap, the seller does not have to take the wine back, and the shopkeeper must pay for all of it. And furthermore, we stated this law only where the wine soured before the market day arrived, and the shopkeeper did not have the opportunity to sell the entire barrel. But if the wine was still of good quality when the market day arrived, then the seller does not have to take the wine back. And Rava says, in the case of a vintner who enters a business venture with another person who will sell the wine for him, and afterward they will split the profits, then if this middleman who receives the wine to sell does so with the understanding that he will bring it to the port of the city of Val Shefat and sell it only there, and before he arrives there, the price of the wine drops, the law is that the vintner must accept the loss. Now, with regard to the previous case, a dilemma was raised before the sages. If the wine becomes vinegar before he reaches Val Shefat, what is the law? And Rav Hillel said to Rav Ashi, when we were in the study hall of Rav Kahana, he said to us, If the wine becomes vinegar, the vintner does not have to accept the loss. And this is not in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yosef, the son of Rabbi Hanina, who holds that as long as the wine is in the jug of the seller, he is able to return it to the seller. So the reason for this is that it is possible that the poor fortune of the middleman caused it to sour. And there are those who say that even if the wine turns into vinegar, the vintner must also accept the loss. In accordance with whose opinion is this? It is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yosef, the son of Rabbi Hanina. And the Mishnah teaches, if the seller said, I am selling you old wine, he is responsible to provide wine from the previous year. And if he said, I'm selling you aged wine, he is responsible to provide wine that is from 3 years earlier. And it is taught in a baraisa, and where he sold him aged wine, he is responsible to provide wine that will continue to age, i.e. maintain its quality until the festival of Sukkot. Why are they talking about festival of Shavuos earlier and here the festival of Sukkot? Because there's this understanding that the harvest in the Holy Land was in the spring, not in the fall like we maybe were used to here in the United States, but in a desert climate like that, the growing season is the winter, the harvest is in the spring, and then you would need something to last at least until Shavuos, which is in the summer, or Sukkot, which is the following fall. And that completes our discussion of Mishnah number 3 here in chapter 6. We're on page 98b. And now Mishnah number 4. With regard to one who sells a plot of land to another, with the buyer intending to build a bridal house for his son or a widowhood home for his daughter on that plot. And similarly, with regard to a contractor who receives a plot of land from another under a commission to build for the owner on that land a bridal house, meaning a house for a bride, for his son, right, for newlyweds, or a widowhood home for his daughter who's moving back to his house because her husband died, sadly. The terms of the transaction are a matter of dispute, and the Mishnah presents the dispute. In the latter case, where the contractor is given this land and says, build a house for my daughter and her son, or my son and his wife, for my son and his wife, or my daughter and her husband, or for my daughter who's returning to my home because her husband died, right? So it's the contractor knows what this house is intended for. So in the latter case, the contractor must build a building that is at least 4 cubits by 6 cubits in size. And similarly, in the case of the sale, the seller must provide a plot of land that can accommodate a building of that size. This is the statement of Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Yishmael says a structure of this size is a cowshed, and a bridal house, or a widowhood home is larger than that. Like, okay, it's a starter house for this guy's married daughter and her husband, or it's a sort of consolation house for his daughter who's moving back home after she was widowed. So it's a small house, right? It's sort of like the guest house, additional dwelling unit, right? ADU, as they say here in LA. So it's going to be small. It's not going to be the size of perhaps the main family house, but it's also not going to be like a prison cell or a cowshed. It has to have some kind of a size, right? So this minimum that was given in the first part of the Mishnah, by Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Yishmael says that's ridiculous. That's too small. Now, one who wants to construct a cowshed builds a structure that is at least 4 cubits by 6 cubits in size. And the Mishnah delineates the standard dimensions for various other structures. A small house is 6 by 8 cubits. A large house is 8 by 10 cubits. Wow, people lived in much smaller homes maybe than they do today. A banquet hall is 10 by 10 cubits. A banquet hall. Maybe I'm understanding cubits wrong. The standard height for each of these structures is equal to the sum of half its length and half its width. And there is a proof of the matter. Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel says the proportions are like the building of the sanctuary. It was 40 cubits wide and 20 cubits long, and its height was 30 cubits, which is the sum of half the width and half the length. Yeah, so I'm understanding cubits correctly. I think what they're saying is, while structures are ordinarily larger than this, it has to be at least this big to even bear the name of a small house or of a banquet hall. If it's smaller than that, you can't even call it that. Now, even at that size, okay, you could call it a banquet house, you could call it a small house, but obviously the buyer is going to have a decision to make whether he wants something this small or not. That's the Mishnah. Now the Gemara. Why do I need the Mishnah to teach specifically a bridal house for his son and a widowhood home for his daughter? Instead, let it teach a bridal house for his son or his daughter and a widowhood home for his son or his daughter. And the Gemara answers, it teaches us a matter in passing, that it is not the proper manner of conduct for a son-in-law to live in his father-in-law's home. Therefore, it is the father of the groom who generally provides a bridal home for the couple, and the bride will return to live near her parents' house only if she is widowed or divorced. Now, support for this is as written in the book of Ben Sirah. I have weighed everything in the pan of a balance scale, and I have not found anything inferior to bran, but inferior to bran is a son-in-law who lives in his father-in-law's house, and inferior to a son-in-law is a guest who brings in a guest, and inferior to a guest is one who answers a matter before he listens. As it is stated, he that gives an answer before he listens, it is folly for him and a disgrace. From Proverbs 18:13. You know, if we hear nothing else today, I think that paragraph was a jewel. That is a gem, and I'm going to reread it. Okay. From the book of Ben Sirah. I have weighed everything in the pan of a balance scale, and I have not found anything inferior to bran, right? This is the lowest quality grain. But inferior to bran is a son-in-law who lives in his father-in-law's house. And inferior to a son-in-law is a guest who brings a guest. And inferior to such a guest is one who answers a matter before he listens. As it is stated, he that gives an answer before he listens, it is folly for him and a disgrace. How often have we been that guy, right? Somebody's telling a story, somebody's explaining something to us. Inside, I'm like, ooh, that reminds me of a good story that I can tell will be very entertaining. At that point, my brain has shut off. I'm not listening to the person in front of me, and I'll just utter some conversation filler to say, oh yeah, that's very interesting, and then get to my story. Very poor behavior when I behave that way, when anybody behaves that way. Must not do it. Okay. The Mishnah teaches, Rabbi Yishmael says, a structure of this size, 4 by 6 cubits, is a cowshed. And then the Mishnah continues, one who wants to construct a cowshed builds a structure at least 4 by 6 cubits in size. So the Gemara asks, who teaches this subsequent clause about a cowshed? There is a sage who says that Rabbi Yishmael teaches it, and it is an elaboration of his statement that that's the house that's 4 by 6 cubits is a cowshed, not a house for a son or daughter. And there is a sage who says that Rabbi Akiva teaches it in response to Rabbi Yishmael's statement. The Gemara elaborates, there's a sage who says that Rabbi Akiva teaches it, and this is what Rabbi Akiva is saying. Even though this structure is of the same dimensions as a cowshed, nevertheless, since there are times when a person constructs his home as small as a cowshed, a contractor has fulfilled his commission if he builds a house to such dimensions. And there is now this of course would be where a person says to a contractor, hey, I got some land out there, build me a house. Now, if you're ever hiring a contractor, I would advise you to be more specific than that when you agree to a contract with your contractor. What they're saying is, if the people didn't have such a discussion and all you said is build a bridal house for my daughter who just got married, or my son who got married rather, or build a widowhood home for my daughter who is returning to my house, and no other particulars were mentioned, okay, so if the contractor builds something this small, he has satisfied his obligation. And there is a sage who says that Rabbi Yishmael teaches that these are the dimensions of a cowshed. And this is what Rabbi Yishmael is saying to Rabbi Akiva. The dimensions that you stated are clearly not the correct dimensions for a bridal house or a widowhood home. As one who wants to construct a cowshed constructs a structure of 4 cubits by 6 cubits, a house for human dwelling is certainly larger than that. Rabbi Yishmael agrees in the strongest possible terms with Rabbi Akiva that a contractor who wasn't giving specific instructions and delivers this tiny house to somebody who asks for a bridal home or a widowhood home, that contractor has not fulfilled his obligation. The Mishnah teaches a banquet hall is 10 by 10 cubits. And the Gemara clarifies, what is a banquet hall? And the answer, a pavilion for roses. A pavilion for roses. Some explain that this refers to a roofed structure with many windows in which roses were placed in order to create a beautiful atmosphere. Others explain that it is a building where distinguished or powerful people would rest. Its roof was like that of a tent, and roses were placed there to provide a pleasant scent. A third suggestion is that it was an important building that opened onto a rose garden. So very different interpretations. I think according to the first one, so what they mean by a banquet hall is more like a pagoda, like just kind of a thing that you could see in a backyard. Okay, that could be 10 by 10 cubits, kind of a little ceiling structure, roses all over the place, nice place for a few people to rest and have a drink. That we could see. But an actual banquet hall where you're going to hold a wedding, 10 by 10 cubits seems like a stretch. It is taught in a baraisa, the standard size of a cantier is 12 by 12 cubits. So the Gemara asks, what is a cantier? It is a decorative courtyard of a mansion. The Mishnah teaches the standard height for each of these structures is equal to the sum of half its length plus half its width. So there is a proof of the matter. Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel says the proportions are like the building of the sanctuary when the Holy Temple stood in Jerusalem. And the Gemara asks, who teaches the phrase proof of the matter? There is a sage who says that Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel teaches it, and this is what he is saying. From where can a proof of the matter be derived? The Mishnah then cites Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, who said that everything is like the building of the sanctuary. And there is a sage who says that the first Tana of our Mishnah teaches it, and understanding that the proof of the Tana wished to recite was from the example of the sanctuary, Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel interjected and expressed astonishment at the idea. And this is what Rabban Gamliel is saying to the first Tana of our Mishnah. From where do you derive a proof? Do you derive it from the building of the sanctuary? Is that to say that everyone constructs their buildings like the building of the sanctuary? Why should they do so? Why should we say that the proportions of any typical house are going to be the same as the sanctuary? The sanctuary is the central building of the whole world. Certainly the central building of the Jewish people. And while that is something to aspire to, still that is the abode in this world, where God causes God's presence to be manifest. It's so special. How can we learn out from its dimensions how other homes are supposed to be built? I am very close to done, so questions or comments, please get them in now. And it is taught in a baraisa, acherim say, as we said a couple days ago, acherim refers to Rabbi Meir. So acherim say the standard height of each of these structures is equal to the length of its cross beams. The Gemara suggests, and let us say more simply, that its height is equal to its width. So the Gemara answers, if you wish, say that formulating the ruling in this way is necessary because the space inside a house widens at the top as the walls get thinner toward the top and the cross beams are actually longer than the width of the floor of the building. And if you wish, say instead that formulating it in this way is necessary because there are indentations in the wall into which the cross beams are inserted. The cross beams are consequently longer than the space inside the house. So, at any rate, if a person didn't come to specific terms with his contractor on the height of the building that he was commissioned to have built, we're going to have a dispute whether the height is equal to half the width plus half the height, or equal to the width, which might be the actual width of the room, or the width of the cross beams, which are a little bit wider than the room since they extend into the walls. That's what I've got for us today. A couple of quick questions. Sharon, so shopkeeper is only open on market days. It is unlike shops now that open daily, and market stands are only open on market days. Yeah, I was a little unclear on that, but it seems like when they're talking about, an innkeeper who sells wine to customers, so normally he's just selling by the glass. That probably is every day other than Shabbos. But he's somebody who might also wish to sell a whole barrel, and that's going to happen on the market day. That's how I read that. Tom says 10 cubits equals 15 feet. Yeah, a cubit is about 1.5 feet. So that's why, hard to say that the minimum size building that you could call a banquet hall is a building that's 15 feet by 15 feet. But maybe banquet hall is not a great translation into English, although I think it probably is. They're just saying that that's the minimum space where you could have a few people, lift a glass. But obviously you would want something much bigger than that if the purpose was to throw weddings, parties, etc. And all the more reason that you really need to be specific and draw up a contract when you're commissioning a building. Sharon says, okay, my ignorance is showing. What distinguishes distilling from the fermenting of wine? And Tom answered, the difference between wine or beer and spirits. Distilling takes a fermented beverage and then heats it to boiling and condenses the fumes. When it cools, there is less volume with a higher alcohol content. Thank you very much. I did not know that. Although I did have a roommate in law school who made beer in our room, and it really wasn't bad. It was very interesting just to kind of watch the process of making beer, and I believe that's called Zymergy. He was a Zymergist, if I recall correctly. And then one last thing I'll just mention today, because this came up twice in the last 2 days, and it worked both times, and it has worked so many times. I think I mentioned it before, but it's worth mentioning again. So if you ever lost something and you're looking for it, right? Your keys, your wallet, a golf ball on the golf course, you've lost something, you really need to find it. This is a prayer that is remarkably effective. Dear God, just as I and that lost object are revealed before you, please, God, may that object be revealed before me. And it's just amazing how often you find it, like almost immediately after uttering that prayer. And what's great about that prayer and all prayers, I mean, we just get so comfortable in our lives, and we just forget to acknowledge and give praise and gratitude to the one who is sustaining us with life and breath and opportunity and sustenance constantly. And so maybe a little bit what they were talking about here earlier about, why does one guy's wine spoil and another's doesn't? Maybe something's going on in his life that is causing his wine to spoil. It's not just the chemistry of the beverage. Now listen, as my friend Josh said this morning, God attends to every detail in the universe. Does a leaf fall and guard a tiny mouse from being seen by a hawk that would have eaten it? How much more God attends to every detail in our lives. No matter how bad things are going, we still have so much to be thankful for. And sometimes we just forget to be thankful enough. And when you're looking for something, when, you start to feel that panic, oh my gosh, I got to find this thing, I got to find this thing. Great time to remember to ask God to help you, and now that you're in a conversation with God, to thank Him, to thank God for all the good that is going on, and especially if you then find it. That's what I've got for us today, and with God's help, we'll be together again tomorrow, Saturday, as early as I can after Shabbos ends. And then for those who will be celebrating Slichos after that, we start kind of after midnight on the Saturday night before Rosh Hashanah, and Rosh Hashanah begins next Wednesday evening. All the best. Good